You may know this, but I'm the minister of this church. I know, it's weird. And I have, over the past several years, made friends that don't go to church. Now, I know for a lot of you that's just normal because you work with people that go to church, you're around people all the time that don't go to church. I, however, am not so much. And so over the last several years, I have made friends that some of them haven't gone to church at all, like ever in their lives. But I have to make friends carefully for this reason. I need them to get to know me a little bit before they find out what I do. Because if they find out what I do first, they may not be my friends ever. Now, why is it that way? Well, Christianity communicates things about itself in a lot of different ways. And some of those ways are positive, some of those ways are negative. And so in the news, there is a lot of negative. And so people read that, they see that, they think this is what all Christians are like, which one of the first things I want them to know is like, not all Christians are the same, you know? So there's that. And then if they went to church, if that church was a negative experience, either with Christians or with their pastor, then I also have to answer for that, for whatever it is that's going on. But one of the stories that is just the funniest to me is that one of my friends invited us over to their house, and then we ended up going to someone else's house for like it was a baby shower, that's what it was. And so a lot of their friends were there, and I only knew a few of them, and I was standing in the kitchen with 3 other people, and 2 of those people knew I was a pastor, and the third one did not. And that one started talking about Christians. And he had some unflattering things to say about Christians. In the meantime, my friends that know what I do are looking at me like, are you going to, and I had to give them a signal like, no, like it's fine. But I have found myself, again, because of what I do, that on one hand, I have to break down sometimes what people think they know about Christians in order to get in the door with them. And it's, it's too simple for us to stand over here and be like, well, they just have it wrong. We need to ask, this is a total side note, not even what I'm talking about today, but we should take the time to figure out why someone really doesn't like Christians, because chances are it came from somewhere. And so I was in this room, I'm waiting there, and I'm thinking to myself, like, as this guy goes, like, he really went for it. And he's going for it, right? And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, what do I do? Do I just walk over and put my hand on his forehead and pray for him? Do I hand him a business card, like Bryce Smith, professional Christian? What do I do? And I chose just not to say anything, because it wasn't the time or place to try to put someone in their place. And if they already think this is what Christians are like I didn't feel the great need to try to fix that right there in that moment. Why do I share that with you? Well, the story that we are going to look at today is one that has a lot of different layers to it, and things are happening on multiple levels, and we need to pay close attention to see what is happening there. And it's a story that we're familiar with. You are all very familiar with this story. It's when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. But I want to challenge you this morning to look at it with some fresh eyes, as fresh as your eyes can be this morning. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the state of Jesus going into this chapter? Can I pause for a second? Nisha, are my slides there? Okay, so I hope you have your Bibles or phones with you this morning. So what was the state of Jesus' life at that point? Well, Remember in chapter 9, he just healed a man that was born blind, which was an unheard of show of power, and it drew both the blind man and Jesus into conflict with the religious leaders. And that particular miracle resonates through several chapters coming after it. People refer to it. People ask, isn't this the guy that healed the man that was blind? But there's a lot of confusion as to who Jesus is. Even though Jesus has done amazing things, people came up with almost any reason to not believe in him. Is he Messiah? Is he demon-possessed? Is he here to deliver people from God? Or is he here to lead them away from God? And people are fighting amongst themselves about it, but all of this is spilling over to Jesus. And Jesus has tried to explain himself in terms that others could easily understand. But that didn't really accomplish anything. So, if you were Jesus, which you're not, I just want to clear that up, but if you were, and you were the Son of God, and you had helped create this world, and you have to spend every moment of your time with people trying to convince them that you're even a good person, like at all. You're doing incredible and amazing things. You are curing people of illnesses they've had their whole lives. You are fixing handicaps that people have had, whether it's blind or lame or whatever it is. Like, he is doing these amazing things, and people hate him for it. If you were Jesus, how would you feel? Disappointment? Probably a lot of disappointment. Sorrow, frustration, dare I say anger over what is going on. And one of the things that I think we really underestimate about Jesus in the Gospels is his patience. He is surrounded by people who are less than him in so many ways. Like people that can never, ever be on his level. He's smarter. He knows God more. He's more wise. He's more powerful. Maybe he was short. Maybe that helped, that he wasn't super tall. I don't know. But he's just around people all the time. And he's having to prove to them who he is. And I know if that were me, I would be beyond frustrated. Think about the times maybe that you've tried to explain something to someone and they didn't get it, so you try to explain it again and they're still not getting it, and by the end you're drawing pictures like on the whiteboard to try to help them get this. By the way, most of the time when I've been in that position, it's because I'm not explaining it very well, to be fair. But Jesus is probably not in that case. But Jesus' patience, the fact that he is so patient and so caring and so loving with everyone when his entire experience with many of them is frustrating and hard and difficult. We need to process this for a second before we jump in, because we know how great Jesus is. We know how good he is, how kind and how loving he is, but we also don't want Jesus to have real emotions besides love. We don't want to see him angry. We don't want to see him frustrated. We don't want to read some of the stories and see how he says really biting comments to people. And we explain it by, they really deserved that. That's not Jesus being angry. That was true, and they just deserved it, right? But no, Jesus felt a lot of things throughout the Bible. He felt so many emotions, and this story today is a very emotional story for Jesus, but maybe not in the way you think. So let's open up our Bibles to John chapter 11. Really apologize that my slides aren't up this morning. They are on the, if you have the Bible app on your phone, they are there. So I'm not sure why it didn't translate from computer to computer. Okay, yeah, for some reason it didn't translate today. So John chapter 11, we're going to read verses 1 through 19. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. This is going to happen in the next chapter. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back." Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So he told them plainly, "Guys, Lazarus is dead." I added the guys part. "And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. This is quite the setup that we have right here. It's a very detailed account of what's going on. And the first thing that I want you to notice about this setup is that Jesus is in complete control of himself and what's going on from the start. Lazarus is a person that he loves, and he finds out that Lazarus is sick, near death, and what is his response? He's not flustered by the news of this. Instead, he very calmly took the news and proclaimed that through this event, which no one even knows what the event is yet, that God will be glorified. So number one, from the start, this is who he is. The disciples don't understand him at all in this part of the story. His closest friends, who travel with him all the time, don't really get what's going on. And it's multiple things here that they don't get. Number one, he says, we're going to stay for 2 more days. They stay for 2 more days. And where they are right now is they're just on the other side of the Jordan River. So they're roughly 20 miles from Bethany. So it's not an impossible trip, but it also is a long trip. It would take a day for them to get there. So he says, we're going to stay. They stay. And then he says, okay, let's go. And their response is what? People want to kill you over there in Judea, where Jerusalem is. People want to kill you. I don't think it's a great idea to be going there. And they're talking about 2 different things. Jesus is saying, I need to go back now for Lazarus. And they're like, well, no. So it's almost like the idea of him doing something for Lazarus has left the building, right? It's kind of not even, and what they're thinking about is his safety. You know, they worry about him, they care about him. And then he says these words from verse 14 and 15, I think it is there. Yeah. He tells them Lazarus has fallen asleep. Now, should they understand that he means Lazarus is dead? To be fair to them, no, right? He said Lazarus is asleep. They don't get it, and Jesus says, guys, no, really, he's not just sleeping, he's dead. He's good and dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there. And this is something we might overlook, but it's really important. For your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. So that you may believe. What does Jesus know about his closest companions and followers and friends? Do they believe in him? Yes. They have left their lives behind to follow him. But he also knows that this belief has holes in it, right? And in this case, he's saying, I really just am glad this is happening. I'm glad that Lazarus has gone to sleep. I'm glad Lazarus is dead so that you will believe. How confusing of a statement is that to the disciples? Wait a second. You're glad he's dead so that I'll believe? Believe in what? Exactly. He doesn't tell them. And at this point, they think it's even more pointless. Because Lazarus is dead, and Jesus can't heal him, they think, from being dead. So their expectation going back is like, this is a pointless trip. Because Jesus, there's nothing you can do for Lazarus. There's nothing you can do. And instead they declare, well, let's just go to our deaths with him. That's how far off the subject they are. Well, I guess we're just going to go and die then, you know. Now, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. There's a lot of reasons why this is important. I mean, you know, if someone's dead for 12 hours, are they really dead? I mean, yes, but are they? I don't know. But 4 days, this is an important notation, particularly because of the Jewish burial customs. The general belief was that the spirit of the deceased hovered around the body for 3 days in anticipation of some possible reentry into the body. But on the third day, it was believed that the body had lost its color and the spirit was locked out. Therefore, the spirit was obliged to enter a place called Sheol, which was the place of the dead. And the passing of the third day signaled the conclusion of the last hope. Once that day is gone, it's over. Now, did people actually raise 3 days later in any case? Probably not, right? But this is what they believed about them. So here's something else. Well, so one, that points to the fact that spiritually, in every way people understood it at that time, he was dead. There was no possible thing on the fourth day. And he's been in the tomb for 4 days. Okay? Now, Jesus got word about Lazarus being sick. Day 1. He stays how many more days? 2 more. So now he's at 3. And he maybe travels the 4th day. When did Lazarus die? Either on day 1 or before Jesus even gets word. Lazarus is dead. So Jesus knew from the beginning he probably wasn't going to get there in time. Now, could Jesus have spoken healing upon Lazarus from where he was? Yes. But something else is going on here. And Jesus is looking to this something else, but he's the only one who sees it. He's the only one. So let's look at verses 20 through 27. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. Okay, keep that last statement of hers in your head, because there's something she doesn't say in that statement. So we have things happening again on 2 different levels. There's Martha's understanding of this situation, and there is Jesus' understanding of the situation. And again, to be fair, of all the people in this story who were not Jesus, the possibilities that Jesus knows, they don't know. And Lazarus is really, really, really dead. Like, it's over. So they're not coming at it from a bad place, per se. Jesus had approached the situation knowing exactly what he was going to do. He was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. But did Martha believe that Jesus could raise Lazarus from the dead? No. She didn't. How do we know that she didn't know that? Well, let's look at the interaction a little bit more closely. She starts it out by saying, "Lord, if you had been here, Lazarus could have been healed." What does that say about her understanding of the situation? That Jesus could have done something 4 days ago, but he can't do anything now. Why? Because he's dead. It's a logical conclusion. They have seen him and heard about him healing people, but this is the final frontier. And we shouldn't look at these words as being judgmental or snarky or anything else. This is a woman who is grieving her brother. And they love Jesus. They know him. He knows them. And it's just the reality of the situation. In some ways, it's a profession of faith by her. I know if you were here, this would have gone differently. But now it's just time to mourn. It's just this is where we are. And she says, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. We want to think about that a little bit. Maybe she has an idea. I don't think that's what it is. I think she's wrestling with what all this means. Why Jesus, not in a matter, but why didn't he get there? Why did Lazarus die when other people didn't, when other people have been healed? And all of these different things. Like, it's still fresh. They are still mourning. And he says to her, okay, you believe in anything, your brother will rise again. Here's what tells us she doesn't know. You're right. He will win. At the last days, at the resurrection, that's when he will rise again. And so Jesus very strongly, very powerfully says to her, no, 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 no. I am the resurrection. I am the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Now, what has he been talking about? Resurrection and life. And what does she say? Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. Did he ask her that? No. But she says it. Why does she say it? Because she believes it's true. This is who she believes he is. But does she think that Jesus, in this moment, can bring Lazarus back to life? No. And again, there's no reason why she should, other than maybe some unspoken notion that how much power does this guy actually have? I know he's the Son of God, but there is one thing that is pretty final in life, and that is death. Her subsequent words kind of spell some of that out for us. So she confesses her belief. Jesus tries to explain it to her, but she doesn't quite get it. But she's there with him, right? She's doing the best she can in this moment. But she doesn't really think that he can do anything about what's going on. So Mary now enters the picture. Now, keep in mind, they are still outside of town, all right? So they're basically standing in the road going into the town. Jesus hasn't even gotten to their house or the tomb or anything else yet. So let's pick it up in verses 28 through 37. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Sounds familiar. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. The shortest Bible verse in the world, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Okay, so now it's Mary's turn to speak into the situation. And Mary is in a different place than Martha is. Martha has kept things, Martha was probably the one who put the burial arrangements together and made sure there was enough food for everybody and did all those things. Mary is handling it completely differently, isn't she? She's torn up about this. And not to say that Martha wasn't weeping or crying. That's not really the point. It's just they're two very different people. And as opposed to the encounter with Martha, which now seems strikingly unemotional from her side, this is a very emotional encounter. Weeping is mentioned repeatedly. The one sound you hear from this part of the story is crying. Crying underscores everything that is happening in this part of the encounter. And there were a lot of people that day. They weren't that far from Jerusalem. It was only 2 miles. And so people had come out to mourn with them. Weeping, and I mean like loud weeping and wailing, would have conformed to Jewish public mourning practices. In fact, at times there were professional mourners and musicians who could come and help the family mourn more effectively. Make it louder. Make it more of a thing, that they're celebrating the life and mourning over the person who is gone. And so Mary's ahead of this group of people who are there to mourn. And when she gets to Jesus, what does she do? She falls on her knees in front of him, says the same thing that Martha said, but it sounds different from Mary. Again, I don't think she's accusing him, but it's just you can feel the emotion of what's going on. And she's weeping, and then all these other people come up and they're weeping with her. So she's joined by this whole group. They're all weeping loudly, and they're in front of Jesus, loudly, demonstrably weeping. And there's her statement, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. So what can we gather a little bit about her understanding of what Jesus is able to do in this situation? Does she think that Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the dead? No. For the same reasons Martha doesn't think. Does she believe in him? Yes. Does she love him? Yes. Does she believe that Jesus had power over illness in the body and things? Yes. But again, death was just a step too far from that. And again, his disciples don't get it. Martha doesn't get it. And Mary doesn't get it. These people that are so close to him, none of them understand it. So you're Jesus, okay? Again, not really, but just for pretend. And your disciples don't think you can do anything about Lazarus and that you are potentially walking into a trap. Martha believes that you are the Son of God, but she also doesn't know what being the Son of God actually means for you. So she doesn't believe there's anything you can do. Mary is on the ground in front of you, surrounded by people who are frankly getting on your nerves. And she believes you could have done something a few days ago, but not now. And in response to all of this, what does Jesus do? He weeps. He weeps. Why? Well, traditionally, and I've taught this myself, we use those verses, Jesus wept, to talk about the empathy that Jesus had. And I've even in my own teaching, I've spun this in a way that's like, Jesus knew this wasn't going to be the end, but he still cried with him. How loving and caring and empathetic is he? I'm not so sure that's the case now, that I think that's what's happening here. So some things we need to think about with that interpretation. Number one, it's a lovely illustration of Jesus' death of compassion, and I don't think it would be out of character at all for Jesus to mourn with those who are mourning. Jesus' emotions were expressed at other times throughout the Gospels. He weeps over Jerusalem. He has strong feelings about, in the other Gospels, when he gets to the garden, he cries, he weeps, like he is an emotional guy. But the Jesus of John is not. he's not the same portrayal as we see in those other Gospels. In the Gospel of John, Jesus lives with great confidence and assurance. He's the Word of God present at the creation of the world. And we're not there yet, but when Jesus prays the night of his arrest, he doesn't pray for himself at all. He spends chapters praying for others. It's a different view of Jesus than the ones that we see, again, in the other Gospels. Now, why is this relevant to Jesus weeping? Well, what was the one thing Jesus knew that no one else knew? He's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. In fact, he told his disciples from the start, this story is not going to end in death. Why? Because he is going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And this Jesus in the book of John is not intimidated by death at all. He's not scared of it. He doesn't feel, he's not going to have to try extra hard, right? He is completely in control of the whole situation. And he has come to Bethany to raise him from the dead. This should be a moment of celebration because the Son of God is here and he is going to bring life. It's impossible, but he's going to do it. And instead, no one thinks he can do anything. No one thinks he can help. No one thinks that anything is going to happen here. This is a moment where he gets to bring joy and nobody sees it. Nobody sees it. But we are told that when Jesus saw the weeping of those around them, that he had a strong emotional response. The NIV tells us that he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. That doesn't quite capture the spirit of the Greek words that were used. A better interpretation of the words is that Jesus became disgusted or angered in his spirit and perturbed by the actions of the people. So, look, clearly Jesus didn't like death. Death, like sin, was an enemy for him. His problem in this story, however, was not death. His problem was that nobody believed in him as much as they should have and could have. Now, are there natural reasons for that? Absolutely. Is he angry at them so much that it's going to damage their relationships? No. But I'll tell you what, he's got to be so frustrated that the mourning is continuing, that it's just going on and getting louder. He showed up, and he is here to do something, and no one else sees it or believes that it's possible. And, Martha had been full of words, and here Mary and her supporters were full of tears, but for all of them, Jesus was unrecognized. They knew him, right? Sorta. They believed in him, right? Yeah, but not fully. Why? Because their understanding of who he was didn't match who he actually was. He was more than they knew. He was more than they understood. He was more than they could wrap their minds around. But if anyone should know, these people should know. They're his people. This is his family. And so Jesus knew that death would not win, but here he is having to deal with all of these people who should know and they don't know, and his response is to get emotional and to weep. God's Son was in their midst. And he's told his disciples, this is not going to end in death. He tells Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. And everyone is really missing the point. And that fact becomes more evident in the next segment of the story. But first, remember how this section ends. What are people doing? They're arguing with one another about who he is. He cannot escape that either. The people who should believe don't believe enough. The people who know him don't really know him. And everybody is still talking about whether he's a good person or not. whether he knows God or not, whether he has any authority or not, whether he's getting his power from God or from demons. They're still talking about the same thing they've been talking about for chapter after chapter after chapter after chapter. And here he is about to raise a man from the dead. What does he do? He weeps. It's an emotional moment for him. Let's pick it up in verses 38 through 44, the last section of this story. Jesus, once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." That's a heartbreaking prayer to me. It really is. We'll get there in a second, though. When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." So how do we know that nobody's really on board with this? Well, they get to the tomb and he says, "Let's roll the stone away." And what does Martha say? No, we're not going to do that. And look, her response is not unreasonable. I mean, let's just say it like she says it. She doesn't want to smell the decaying body of her brother. She'd rather not have that experience. And I don't blame her. Bodies began decomposing rather quickly in Palestine because they were not preserved by embalming processes like the Egyptians did. So they would put the body, they'd wrap it, they'd put it in this place, and they'd pour spices over it to try to flavor it. So maybe you get more of that than other things. But it's hot, and it's dry, and this is where they are. So they get there, and Jesus, for the first time in the story, really takes control. He's let everyone else have their say so far and direct us where it's going, but now he takes control, and he commanded that the rock be moved. So finally they move it, and look at his words. What did he say to Martha? "Didn't I tell you 10 minutes ago that if you believe in me, you will see the glory of God?" And then he prays. And why does this prayer break my heart? It breaks my heart for this reason. The prayer is not for him or for God. He is trying to prove once and for all that he is actually the Son of God, that he is actually capable of doing something here, and that they can believe in him. So look at the words of the prayer again. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." And listen to this. "I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." Because what does he know about his closest friends and all these people? He knows they kind of believe in him. But there's still all these questions and these worries and these fears. And so he says, "God, I know you're going to do this. I knew you were going to do this from the start because I was going to ask you to, and you listened to me, and we're together on this, but they don't know. So that's why I'm saying to everyone right now, you're doing this. It's not me, it's you, so let's now do it." And then what does he do? He commands Lazarus to get up. Isn't that awesome? "Lazarus, time's up, dude. Come on." And he speaks from outside the tomb. He speaks life into him again. Now, I've talked to you a lot before about what has to happen when different miracles take place, right? So it's pretty incredible because there had to be some repair work done on Lazarus, right? He has started to decay. His skin has probably turned weird colors. He doesn't smell very good. Things are not working like they should. And in that moment, when Jesus speaks life into him, he also speaks this incredible restoration where he is healed from death. It's amazing. I don't know what had to have happened in that, but whatever it had to have happened for him to get up and do this, it's a lot more than we think it is. Just just plain and simple. So he commanded him to come out, and sure enough, Lazarus comes out looking like some sort of mummy. He's got these grave clothes wrapped around him, and so Jesus gives a third command. Go help him, please. He didn't say please. Go help him. He's in his grave clothes. He's having a hard time walking. Go and get that stuff off of him. And so get this. Why does he do that? Because these people who didn't believe in him now have to walk up to a dead man, a formerly dead man, and take his grave clothes off of him. They become participants in the miracle. And in the terms of John, and in what we know about him, they are going to be incredible witnesses to who Jesus is. Incredible witnesses. For not only, they didn't just hear about it, they didn't just see it. They took part in freeing Lazarus from the things of death. The aftermath of this miracle, you're not going to believe this, was that people were confused about him, and the religious leaders decided it's time for him to die. Here's something you've probably never considered about this particular story. In the Gospel of John, it is this story that sets off the last week of Jesus' life. You know, in the other Gospels, he's been up, up in Galilee. He's been in the north all this time, and he comes to Jerusalem, and he comes in riding on the back of a donkey, and everyone's celebrating. And it's that moment in all the other Gospels that seals his fate. I mean, it doesn't help when he goes to the temple the next day and drives everyone out. Like, it just keeps getting, more pronounced. But it's that thing. But in this story, in this Gospel, it is the healing of Lazarus. Because what are they going to do about a man who can raise people from the dead? They have to kill him. I mean, because after all, no one comes back from death, right? Jesus will spend one more night with his friends before he returns to Jerusalem on the back of a donkey with waving palm branches and people shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is the King of Israel." Now, there's a lot that we can take from this story. I want to just make the most simple application for us today, because it's also the hardest one to get over, to make happen and work in our lives. Whatever you think God is capable of, you're selling him short. And all of us, in our lives, all the time, pray for God to do something and walk away from that prayer knowing what he can't do, what he won't do, what he's not going to do. And so even when we stand there and we pray, "God, move and be powerful and mighty," we walk away from that being like, let's hope for the best. And if there's one thing this parable teaches us, if there's one thing we get from this, it's not just that Jesus is powerful. It's not just that he's great. It's not that he's the Son of God. It's that God, Jesus, they're amazing. Like, we can't understand them. We can't grasp the fullness of who they are. We cannot grasp the fullness of their power. But we also know where the rest of the story is going, which tells us we also can't grasp the depth of his love. That this all-powerful Son of God would not only deal with people who get on his nerves for a long time, which is also a good gospel truth, but he's going to go die for them, even though they don't get it, even though they don't believe in him like they should, even though they don't understand, even though they'll argue with him in front of a tomb that there's nothing to be done here. Jesus is still going to go die for those people. You know who else he's going to die for? Those that hate him, those that don't believe in him, those that want him dead, those that are going to kill him. He dies for them too. Whatever we could say about God, it's not enough. Whatever we think we understand about him, we are woefully short of who God actually is. What does that mean then, living as a person of faith who is in relationship with this God who can do anything at any time? And I think this is the hard part, isn't it? Because ultimately, we have to believe that God is capable. Even when we're not, and even when we're butting up against the restrictions, against the things that would hold us back, against the things that we think are impossible to overcome, God is still capable, friends. He's still capable. In the face of anything, Jesus will win. And because Jesus wins, guess what? We win. And does the victory always look the same? Absolutely not. Does it look like what we want it to? No, and that's probably a good thing. But just know, God is more than you think He is. And you could spend the rest of your life trying to think bigger, and you're still not going to do it to the fullness of God. Hallelujah.